Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on the NRCS EQIP Technical and Financial Support for Conservation on Organic Farms webinar by Sarah Brown of Oregon Tilth. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension. We're a community of cooperative extension service personnel, researchers, ag professionals, organic certifiers, and practitioners. You can find all of our published articles, videos, and our many recorded webinars on organic farming topics on our website at extension.org/organic_production. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our speaker. Sarah Brown manages Oregon Tilth's Organic Conservation Program, which aims to bring organic technical assistance to the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. When she's not working with NRCS and providing outreach to producers, Sarah is also a beginning organic farmer in Oregon's Willamette Valley. Sarah will be speaking for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have half an hour for questions and answers.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I do just want to reiterate that I am employed by Oregon Tilth, and so this presentation, while I work very closely with NRCS, it's not meant to represent them. We have a unique contribution agreement with the agency where I'm tasked with providing organic technical support to their staff around the country. So it's really exciting for me to be a part of this, and I think it really shows the initiative that the agency has been taking in working with organic farmers. So I'm really glad that you all joined us today, and hopefully we can get some of your questions answered regarding how to work with NRCS and what is actually available. And before I get going, I also just want to say that we've included 3 poll questions spread out through the presentation. And the goal with those is to just kind of get some feedback from producers out there. If you've used the program, what has been your experience and what challenges you might have faced. So we really appreciate you taking the time to answer those, and they're very, very brief. So with that, the outline and what I hope to cover today is to explain what some of these acronyms are. My husband and I are beginning farmers, and we've been hearing about NRCS and EQIP now for, I don't know, probably the past 10 years, and we've always wondered what they are and if they would really work for a small CSA farm. And in taking this position, I've learned quite a bit that hopefully we can clear up for folks. And then we'll go into some of the details of the organic initiative and what is available there, walk through the sign-up process, what that looks like, talk about what conservation practices are available. And we're fortunate to have a few slides on Pie Ranch, which is a great diversified farm on the California coast. And they've worked closely with their NRCS office and have been very, very supportive and willing to share their experience. And then lastly, we'll finish with a couple of the best resources that are available for producers to assist them with accessing this program. So first off, I just wanted to explain what NRCS is, and that's the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And that is an agency in the Department of Agriculture. And they are a national federal agency, and they have state and local offices. And so for folks on the phone, we'll have information at the end on how to find your local office, because those are going to be the people that you're really working with on a one-on-one basis. There's a number of great services that NRCS provides, and one of my favorite is the soil survey, and there's a little screenshot here of the web soil survey, and it's a great tool that's available online. You can search by address and pull up the soil maps for your specific farm and find out all about the different soil types that are there. So I don't have the exact website address pulled up, but you can definitely find that on the regular NRCS website. There's a number of technical assistance programs and services that NRCS can offer. There's farm bill programs that can provide financial assistance, and that's what EQIP's all about, and we'll get into that more in a second. There's emergency assistance programs, conservation partnership efforts, and information and outreach. And it's just been really surprising to me, having spent the majority of my time in the last couple of years in kind of the organic nonprofit world, to learn about how many great, great tools and expertise is available through NRCS. So as far as EQIP goes, that acronym stands for Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and that is a fancy way of saying that it's a program that provides technical and financial assistance to help plan and implement conservation practices that address natural resource concerns. And those resources can be soil, water, plants, animals, air, and other related resources on ag land and non-industrial private forest land. So it's a fantastic program if you are wanting to address conservation on your farm, if there's things that you haven't tried before that you'd like to implement, if you're considering cover crops but you don't really know where to start. This is probably one of the best programs for you. And within the EQIP program, there is a specific initiative targeted at organic. So for this initiative, certified organic, transitioning to organic, and exempt from certification producers are able to access money that is set aside specifically for these folks. So if you're certified, you'd submit your organic system plan. If you're transitioning or you're an exempt producer, the next slide will show the self-certification form that you'll fill out. Another unique aspect of this initiative is that there is targeted assistance available for transitioning producers. And later on, I'm going to go through a number of the practices that are available through EQIP. One of those specific practices is a plan that's for supporting the transition to organic. And I've heard folks not understand this correctly and think that they're actually going to get an organic system plan written, and that's not the case. But the conservation plan that you can have written will address many of the components of your organic system plan. You'll look at biodiversity and soil quality and pests and on all of those things. So this is a really neat practice. It's not required for transitioning producers. You don't need to sign up for it to access the program. And the other thing about it is that it's written by technical service providers, and those are basically NRCS-approved contractors that can write these plans. And one of the biggest hurdles in this program overall has been the lack of technical service providers that are experienced with organic. And there's a number of projects going on nationally to address that, and a number of states nationwide are really, really taking this on and trying to recruit and train those folks. But again, it's not required. If you are in a state where there are technical service providers, it can be a very valuable tool for assessing what the specific conservation needs are on your farm while you're going through that organic transition. So this next slide, again, is the self-certification form. I'm going to pull that up here. And I just took a screenshot of this because I wanted to go through it with folks. So there's a bullet here for transitioning to organic and for exempt. I cut the one off that's for certified organic because it's pretty straightforward. The key things to note here that if you identify as a transitioning to organic producer, you agree to develop and implement an organic system plan that's following the standards set out by the National Organic Program. You'll also be identifying a certifying agent that you plan on working with, and that's really important just so that when you're in that transitioning in those 3 years since applying a prohibited substance, you have somebody that you can go to and say, you know, can I use this product? Is it going to be an issue if I plan on getting certified in the near future? Additionally, you're agreeing to develop and implement an organic system plan. NRCS recognizes, you know, that transitioning is a risky time. You know, you can be transitioning for 3 years, you might be transitioning for 5 years, you might be transitioning for longer, and then decide it's not going to work for you. And so while you're agreeing to develop and implement an organic system plan, that plan doesn't necessarily have to be submitted. NRCS is not going to be flipping through it and approving or disapproving it. That is something that you're going to have to do with your certifier. For exempt producers, so this is a category, exempt from certification producers, that is spelled out in the National Organic Program rules, who qualifies for that. Basically, it's organic producers that are selling less than $5,000 annually in gross organic products. So if you fit into that category, for NRCS, for the Organic Initiative, again, you're going to have to agree to develop and implement an organic system plan. You're going to follow the organic standards, and again, you'll be signing this, self-certifying that is what you're doing. So it's really open to quite a few different groups of farmers. And it's pretty amazing. $50 million is available nationwide. In the past few years, we've never used more than $30 million, and so there are substantial funds out there, and we're really hoping to get the word out so more folks take advantage of this program. One of the neat things about the Organic Initiative is that it's money specifically set aside for these groups, and so you're not having to compete with some of the larger conventional farms. So also, there is a producer payment limit. So your contract might be a number of years, but you cannot exceed a payment of $20,000 per year or $80,000 over the life of the entire contract. And that does differ from regular EQIP payment limits. And so some folks, some of the larger organic farms that are implementing a substantial amount of conservation might opt to go with regular EQIP instead of the Organic Initiative because of this payment limit. That's just one other consideration. So ranking is also something that folks need to know about, and the EQIP Organic Initiative is a competitively ranked program. Again, you're not being ranked against conventional producers, so it's less competitive than regular EQIP. It's important to know that priority is given to applicants with the largest conservation impact. So I've spoken with farmers in the past who have said, well, I signed up, but I didn't meet the ranking threshold, and they're not going to fund me. And if you only sign up for one practice, you're probably not going to rank really well. So conservation plans and contracts that have a more holistic plan in place that are addressing a number of resource concerns on the farm are going to fare much better. And it's a year-round sign-up period, so you can actually sign up during any point in the year, but the ranking cutoffs are listed here below. So tomorrow is the second ranking cutoff. It's probably too late at this point to sign up, but for the June 1st ranking, you have plenty of time. And you'll definitely need to give yourself some time to go into the office and do the application and all the work that entails. So you want to give yourself a couple of weeks. There is still money available this year, and I really hope after this presentation that more folks go in to take advantage of this assistance. So what does the sign-up process look like? Well, the first thing you're going to do is contact NRCS. And again, at the end of the presentation, we'll have information on where to find your local NRCS office. And you'll go in, and the first thing you'll do is identify resource concerns. Once you've done that, you'll also identify which conservation practices you can use to address those. And I'm going to dive much more in detail on this in a second. And then you'll also simultaneously be contacting the Farm Service Agency, and they will help establish your eligibility to participate in Farm Bill programs. They'll also give you your official farm track number. And in working with them, they're going to require a number of different documents. You'll have to show that you have controlled management over the farm, entity documents, highly erodible land determination, adjusted gross income documentation, proof of identity, signature authority, and possibly others. So again, you'll want to give yourself some time to get through all this paperwork. So with NRCS, you'll go in, you'll submit an application, they'll work with you to determine your land eligibility. They'll also gather irrigation history. And they'll do that because there are actually irrigation practices available. And so by getting your irrigation history, it'll help determine what practices are available for you. Then you'll develop a conservation plan, and we're going to get into that more in a second here. Your application will be screened and ranked, and then you're going to develop the specifications for your plan. So that's kind of all the nuts and bolts about how it all goes together. And so with that, we are going to skip to our first poll question. Alice, are you going to pull that up?
Yeah, I'm just launching it now.
Okay. All right, great. So we're asking folks how you heard about the EQIP Organic Initiative, if you heard about it through this sign-up or newspaper or radio, a local nonprofit or partner organization, or an official NRCS press release, or from an individual or other. And this will be really helpful for us moving forward as far as outreach goes, to know what's most effective.
Okay, we'll just leave this up for another 5 seconds or so until a few more people have voted, and then we'll take it down. And okay.
All right. Okay.
You able to move the screen? Okay, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. All right, so developing a conservation plan, what does that entail? So the first key point that you're going to have to address is, what are the resource concerns on your farm? And you know, if you'd come out to my farm 5 years ago, I probably would have had my own ideas about what those are. But NRCS actually has very clearly defined resource concerns that they can help folks with. Some of those are outlined on the slide that's currently up. But basically, resource concerns for NRCS are unexpected degradations of soil, water, air, plant, or animal resources. And they're usually a result of human activity. So what you're going to do with your NRCS planner is take an inventory of what's going on your farm. And then after doing that, you are going to select conservation practices to address those. So I think it's really, really key. I talk to NRCS folks quite a bit who say, people just come in and they say, we want this practice or this practice, and they don't have any resource concerns. So when you begin this conversation with your local office, it's really important to think about it from this perspective, and think about what's going on conservation-wise on your farm. So once you've identified the resource concerns, the next step is deciding what conservation practices you can use to address those. So NRCS, again, has very specific criteria for all the conservation practices that they have available. And they've gone through a vetting process that's science-based to determine how to successfully install cover crops. What rates are we going to use? What nutrient budgets? What are we going to be? What are we going to be planning based on? And so there's specifications for all of those. And these conservation practices are really going to make up what you get technical and financial assistance for. And you'll notice at the bottom of the slide, I say that practices vary by state. And so that's really important to keep in mind. I'm going to go through some of the more popular practices, but again, I want to reiterate that you really need to check with your local office to see what's available in your area. All right. So I've divided the practices into a couple different categories. Management practices are kind of broader and more holistic, in that they're looking at how you manage different systems on your farm. And these are a number of them that NRCS has available. Irrigation water management will look at how you're irrigating and the efficiency of your systems. Nutrient management will look at the rate and timing and application of nutrients on your farm. Wildlife habitat is pretty straightforward. And so some of these might not be applicable to your farm, others will be, and these tend to be much more involved in that there's a substantial amount of planning that needs to be done to put these into place. And something else I want to point out is that you might look at these practices and think, oh, well, I'm already doing nutrient management. I take a soil test and I go into my local dealer's office and we sit down and we come up with a plan of what to apply. Well, the NRCS nutrient management standard might actually be more than that. It might say you're going to do a soil test, you're going to do a compost analysis, we're going to sit down with a planner and look at extension recommendations for nutrients on the crops that you're growing and come up with something much more detailed. So it does depend on the practice, and it varies a bit by state. So you'll want to really know what these practices are before signing up for them, and you'll also want to know, it might be more or less than you think just by looking at it. So it's important to get those details. So vegetative practices tend to be really common, especially for organic growers. There's some really helpful ones here that can help you in meeting the National Organic Program regulations. So cover crop is a great one that NRCS can provide assistance with. And again, you're picking these practices to address resource concerns on your farm. So let's say you've traditionally been cover cropping to add nitrogen to the soil. If you realize that you have lack of habitat for pollinators on your farm, or if you realize that there's erosion taking place, NRCS can help you use cover crops for another purpose, and they can help you with the planning of that and also financially with the costs associated with it. So hedgerows and filter strips can also serve multiple purposes. Maybe they're for habitat, maybe they're for water quality, but again, they could maybe help you with the buffer requirements needed for organic certification. So there's quite a number of things available through the Organic Initiative that would also be very helpful for transitioning producers to meet the organic program standards. Okay, and I mentioned that there are irrigation-related practices, and your eligibility for these will be determined based on your irrigation history. Basically, NRCS wants to make sure that you're improving efficiency on your farm. And so you can see there are a number of practices here that could possibly be available. I do want to note that with irrigation practices and on the next slide, structural practices, that these tend to be more expensive. And so when you're thinking about the Organic Initiative $20,000 payment limit, it's really important to keep that in mind. Additionally, with irrigation and again with structural practices, in many cases, NRCS will want you to be working with an engineer to ensure that the practices are implemented to the best possible standard. And I think, NRCS's goal is to help you install practices that are really going to address conservation on your farm. And so they do have very high standards when it comes to some of these practices. And I've talked to growers in the past who have been a 1 or 2 acre farm, and they wanted to sign up for drip irrigation, so they did, and they felt like the system and the design that the NRCS and engineers came up with was way, way, way overbuilt for them. So it's definitely an important conversation to have with your NRCS planner, whether or not it's appropriate for your farm, but in many cases it can be very helpful. I mean, for these structural practices, I had no idea that I could get assistance with putting in an access road, for instance, or fencing. So again, these practices need to address resource concerns. You can't get assistance putting in a fence around your house, but if it's for wildlife or if it's for grazing, there could be an opportunity for you. Okay, and then there's a number of other practices that don't really fit into any of those categories that I wanted to add. Mulching is obviously a common practice on organic farms, and NRCS can provide assistance with that. You'll have to talk with your local office about what assistance is available in your area. Some areas can provide assistance with straw mulches. I've seen fabric and plastic mulches available, so definitely something worth looking into. Seasonal high tunnels have been incredibly popular in the last year or so. And as with the organic initiative, there was a separate seasonal high tunnel initiative this year. But the seasonal high tunnel is also available through the organic initiative as a conservation practice. So it's another way of accessing that very, very popular season extension tool. And then there are a number of wildlife habitat practices, energy management practices that are also could be very, very helpful on your farm. So I've spoken with producers in the past who've said, oh, I just thought I could only get seasonal high tunnel. I didn't know about any of these other things. And so definitely when you're talking with NRCS personnel, make sure to ask what else is out there. And again, it's important to identify what resource concern they're going to be addressing. So how do you implement conservation practices? This obviously is not the right way to go about it. But the first step is you'll identify which ones you're going to use on your farm, and then you're going to be developing job specifications. And these are the documents that really outline all the details, they answer all the considerations that you might have for that particular practice. And it's important to note, again, that these can change by state, what exactly the specifications will look like. So for cover crops, for instance, you'll work with NRCS to identify why you're using it. I mentioned it could be for habitat or soil quality or erosion, if you're going to be using native or non-native seeds, grasses, legumes, or mixes, when you're planting it, how you're planting it, if it's going to need any irrigation or fertilizer, if weeds are going to be an issue, and then also how it's going to be incorporated. And so in some cases, you might want to even ask the NRCS person in advance, if I sign up for cover crops, what exactly does that mean? Because when you do sign up for the organic initiative and you get accepted, you will eventually be signing a contract, and you want to make sure that you're very clear on what you're signing a contract for, obviously, beforehand. The NRCS folks that I know are generally very happy to work with producers as much as possible to make sure that these practices will work for them on their farm. So in some cases they have flexibility, in some cases they don't. And so it's important, especially with organic producers who the agency might have less experience working with, to recognize that it's a learning experience for you and for the NRCS staff, and that you do need to be patient, and it might take some time to get figured out, but folks are getting brought up to speed on organic, and that's why I'm here. So the agency really, really is supportive of working with growers. So for pollinator hedgerows, there's, again, a number of questions. Why you're using it, what plants you'll be using. You'll want to make sure that you have bloom during the appropriate time for the pollinators, and you'll want to make sure that it's spread out over a long period of time. You'll want to be deciding how high or how wide this area is going to be, if it's going to need irrigation, if it's going to have wildlife habitat. That could be a big question for fresh market growers, and food safety issues. And, of course, monitoring and maintenance, if it's going to need continued irrigation, if there's going to be weed issues. And that's really an important question, too, because when NRCS provides assistance to install these practices, they really want to make sure that they're successful. And so it's important to think about the long-term maintenance of these practices as well. And then compost facilities, just as another example, I think there's a lot of potential to be working with NRCS to put these on farms, again, related to the food safety concerns that have been pretty widespread in the media lately, and one of the biggest issues is compost and manure. And so composting facilities from NRCS's perspective are used as a way of addressing water quality and leaching concerns, and so this could be very, very helpful on fresh produce farms as well. But there's a number of questions that do need to be answered: location and size, if you're bringing manure from off-site or if it is produced on the farm, and how much and how big the facility needs to be, if it's going to be a concrete slab or covered, or what that's all going to look like, if water needs to be available for making the compost, and then for organic systems, of course, you want to make sure that the materials used are approved for organic systems. I think we lost a little bit of this slide, unfortunately, but this slide is going over the costs and financial assistance that's available through the Organic Initiative. So unfortunately, the photo that was cut off here showed practice costs, sample practice costs from Oregon, and recognizing that costs will definitely vary from state to state. The best way to find out what payments are available for you is to, again, go into your local office. And the way that these payments are determined is by looking at the typical costs. So for cover crop, for example, NRCS will look at the specifications for cover crop. What does that entail? And they'll break down what it will typically cost to put in cover crop on a farm. And so it's not going to be if the payment, for example, was $150 an acre, it might cost you $200 or it might cost you $100, but you're going to get paid the NRCS payment of $150 either way. And so that's important to know. You want to make sure that the costs are appropriate for you on your farm. You might not want to be losing money probably, and so ensuring that the work that you're doing is appropriately supported is important. And then I have a couple bullets here of really good questions to ask. So again, NRCS planners have so many programs that they're working on, and organic is one of the smaller ones. And so these are things that it can never hurt to bring up. If you fall into the beginning farmer, limited resource producer, or socially disadvantaged category of producer, it's worth asking if you do, because you could be eligible for an increased payment of up to 25%. So definitely ask on that. Many practices also have multiple payment scenarios or rates. So again, using cover crop as an example, there could be a payment for using cover crops for pollinators. There could be a payment for using cover crops for erosion or cover crops for weed control. And those scenarios might have different payment rates because they cost different amounts to implement. So you'll want to make sure that the rate you're being paid appropriately reflects what you're doing on the farm. So again, that's a really good question to ask. And then lastly, some states have organic and or small farm payment rates. And so an example of that would be for nutrient management. Traditionally, payments have been made by the acre. And I've talked to a lot of small farmers who've said, well, if it's only $10 or $20 an acre, it's not worth going through all the paperwork to sign up. And so I've been doing a lot of work with NRCS lately to ensure that we have some small farm payments available. And these might not be available in all states at this time, but it's certainly worth asking, because in these scenarios, instead of being paid by the acre, you might just get a set payment for doing nutrient management on your entire farm. So it's kind of neat where that option is available. And field office staff, again, have so much going on, it can never hurt to ask just to make sure you're getting all the details. Okay, some other important points. NRCS certifies installed practices before making payment to a producer. So you need to come up with the money to implement the practice before you're paid. And there are a number of resources out there that provide conservation loans if you don't have that money. The USDA Farm Servants Agency does have a conservation loan program. And I was really excited to hear about what's called the Shade Fund, and they're located back east, and they've been working very closely with NRCS offices to also provide those gap financing loans if you don't have the money up front. So their website is also worth checking out for that. Program payments may be taxable. You'll have to check with your accountant to figure out those details. You may sign up for multiple Farm Bill programs on the same farm, and you can have more than one active EQIP contract at a time on the same farm. And so, again, with the payment limits, it might make sense to kind of spread them out or have multiple contracts. But again, the more holistic the plan and the larger the conservation impact, the more likely it is that it will rank well. All right, so we are going to take another little break here and pull up our second poll question.
Okay, here we go.
All right, and this is really to help me with my work. Have you been satisfied with the technical assistance offered through the Organic Initiative? So for those of you who have used the initiative, we're trying to find out how you felt the technical assistance has been.
Okay, we'll just have this up for about 10 more seconds or so. Okay, thanks.
All right. So now I just wanted to briefly go through a conservation plan that was used on Pie Ranch in California. So here's the title page. This is what they look like. And then to dive a little bit more into detail here, the next page shows a highlight of what the maps are that are developed, that can be developed for your farm. So for your organic program, for the National Organic Program, one of the regulations is that in your organic system plan you have maps, and NRCS makes incredible maps. This technical assistance is available whether or not you sign up for EQIP, so make sure to go in and ask folks in your local office if it's something you're interested in. There's a map here on soils. There's a map here on rainfall, on different species around the farm, and then again a topographical map. So they have tons of great info out there. Okay, and so this is the map that was used with a conservation plan. So this is Pie Ranch, and you can see they have a number of different conservation practices in place here. This yellow marking shows where the watering facilities they're installing on their farm go. They're putting in some fence. They're doing a hedgerow planting all along here. There's an area that's cover cropped, a critical area planting, which was maybe a slopey area on the farm that really needed some erosion control potentially, an area that they're mulching, and then also an area where they're putting upland wildlife habitat. And then they also have a number of other conservation practices that maybe weren't included on the map. So this really lays out what is going where. And then included in the plan are a brief narrative of how the cover crop, for instance, is going to be implemented. So they're going to use it, a cover crop of small grains, grasses, or legumes, or a combination when the strawberry is not actively growing, to reduce soil erosion, improve soil tilth, water infiltration, aeration. They have a planting date, and a seeding rate will be adjusted to provide a dense stand. And so you can see here they have 3 acres that they're going to put in cover crops. They have it planned for September, and then once they actually went through with it, it was recorded in their plan. And then this is very small, but this is a copy of what the actual job specifications look like. And I mentioned that once you pick your conservation practices, you really get into the nitty-gritty. So this is kind of like the recipe of how you're going to do these different practices. And so it will have the seed bed prep, the materials you're using, the seeding rates, the planting dates, and then it will also have space for NRCS and landowner acknowledgement and approval. And this is basically what you're signing up to do, the action items. And just another example here, a hedgerow planting. So it's a living fence of shrubs and or trees adjacent to pie field to provide habitat. And it says the planned area and the time and date that it was implemented. All right, we're going to take another quick break for our last poll question.
Okay, here we go.
And this will just be really helpful for me in working with NRCS headquarters to get some feedback from producers as to what challenges they've had associated with the organic initiative.
Okay, we'll be closing that in just about 5 seconds. Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay, so before we get into questions, I wanted to point out a few other opportunities and resources. NRCS has state technical committees and local working groups, and these groups provide input on what priority local resource concerns are. They can provide input on screening and ranking criteria, and they can provide feedback on what practices are offered, if new practices should be adopted, or if payments aren't what they should be. So an issue that has come up nationally that the organic community has identified is that we don't have enough representation on these groups. And so if it's something that you'd be interested in being active on, I have a great resource that I'll point out in just a minute on that. Additionally, you could host a tour for NRCS staff. You could attend a listening session. A number of NRCS offices are hosting listening sessions to get feedback from producers and share more information on the program. And then NRCS also has conservation innovation grants that are grants available for doing different conservation research and projects. And that information can be found from your local or from your state NRCS office. Okay, and then the next resource that I'd like to point out is on the Oregon Tilth webpage. So the website is across the top here. And on our website for the Organic Conservation Program, we have a number of different sections. We have an overview of the work that we do, information on the NRCS trainings we provide, and then resources for producers. And I wanted to go through a number of the resources that we have links to. One of them is a fantastic document from NCAT and the ATRA project. And it's a great, very thorough overview on all the details of the sign-up process. And that is available as a link from our website or on the ATRA website as well. We have a list of the EQIP Organic Initiative state contacts. So if you've tried accessing the program in the past and it hasn't gone well, or you have specific questions about the program, there are state contacts in every NRCS state office that can help field those questions for you. There's a flyer that the National EQIP Organic Initiative team put together giving a basic overview on the program. And then there are a few resources that were developed by partners that can be used for learning about pollinator conservation or biodiversity conservation on your farm. This one is the one I wanted to point out that has more information on state technical committees and working groups, and it's a guide for farmers to learn about how to take advantage and join in those conversations. Okay, and then we're about to get to questions here. Before we do, I wanted to again reiterate, I'm not an NRCS staff, and so because of that reason and because practices and can vary so much from state and to region, I just want to make sure folks know where to find their local offices. So if you go to the National NRCS website, you will see on the side there is a drop-down menu where you can select your NRCS state office. And once you do that, you'll be redirected to a state website. And I pulled this one up as an example. And in the left-hand column, you should find a link for finding a local service center. And that's what you'll want to do to find your closest office. This website, I think this was Idaho, they did a great job because they also had the Organic Initiative info on their front page. I was excited to see that as well. So we're about ready to open it up to questions. And before we do, I do again want to encourage folks, the best resource is your local office. We do have a number of resources on our website as well, and I'm happy to answer any general questions that I can about the program and how the process works.
Okay, thanks so much, Sarah. We're going to be moving on to questions in just a second, but I wanted to mention to everybody that this webinar is being recorded, and so it's going to be posted to the eextension.org website with the following link. You can see it under upcoming and archived webinars. And if you have general questions about organic farming, not specifically about the EQIP program, you're also welcome to use our online Ask an Expert system at extension.org/ask. And finally, we just want to say that we want to continue offering these programs, and so we really need your feedback. So please fill out our follow-up survey, which you'll be receiving in an email later today. So now let's move on to the questions. We have quite a few coming in. If you have additional questions, you just click the question box and you can open it up with a little plus sign and you type in a question and hit return. We'll do as many as we possibly can in the next half an hour. So moving on to the first question. Are EQIP funds available for urban or peri-urban farms that would not be considered for most rural development programs?
That's a great question, and one that I get quite a bit. I'm located in the Portland metro area in Oregon, and I know that we have an NRCS office here working with peri-urban farms. So the key thing is going to be contacting your local FSA and NRCS office to make sure that you're eligible for Farm Bill programs. In many cases, it could work out. And I noticed, too, that there was a question about, is there a minimum size for the farm? And from my understanding, there's currently no minimum size, but there are other eligibility questions that you would need to get answered from FSA in those situations. So FSA will really be able to determine if your exact farm is eligible.
Okay. Regarding the dollar limits for the organic program, can we at the same time apply for the regular EQIP programs in addition to the organic initiative? Or, for example, are the funding for both considered separately?
Good question. So you can apply for multiple programs at once. Whether or not, depending on what you're applying for, it might or might not work. You're probably, my understanding, you're not going to get paid for the same practice through different programs, so that would be something you'd need to look out for and definitely ask your local NRCS staff about. What people will sometimes do is they'll apply through the Organic Initiative and through regular EQIP and see which ranks better. Just in, if they make it into one program and not the other, they kind of have that backup. But in most cases, because there's less competition in the Organic Initiative, you don't need to do that.
Okay, here's a question that may be for a local representative, but I'll ask it anyway here. It says, I've just been approved for an FSA beginning farmer rancher loan on land which has not been farmed in 50 years. Obviously, I'm going to farm it. My question is if I could be eligible for funds if there isn't currently erosion, etc.
So Yeah, the key point here is going to be identifying resource concerns on your farm. So just because it hasn't been farmed doesn't necessarily mean you're not eligible, but you're going to need to walk the property with your local NRCS planner and see if you want habitat or if you are going to need assistance coming up with a nutrient management plan. So I think there's absolutely potential there.
Okay, here's some questions about whether or not you need to set up a conservation plan for the farm before you apply for these initiatives.
Good question. So to be ranked and to see whether or not you make the cutoff to be accepted into the program, you do need to identify what conservation practices you're going to use. So you don't necessarily get into the details of all the specifications and that I just recently went through, but you do need to identify the actual practices and resource concerns that you're addressing.
Okay, we had a couple questions about beginning farmers. One person wanted to know if you could just sort of talk a little more about defining what a beginning farmer is, and another person wanted to know how the NRCS will work with beginning farmers with no financial or land use records to build a program that can sculpt beginning farms into sustainable, resource-efficient organizations.
These are great questions, and I myself am a beginning farmer, so I can totally relate to the need here. Again, you're going to need to make sure that you're identifying resource concerns. So if you're buying a piece of property that has been neglected, or if you're wanting to begin having good management systems in place, there's definitely an opportunity. I do not know off the top of my head how a beginning farmer is defined in USDA programs, and I absolutely should. But your local NRCS office would know for sure. And I would very much encourage beginning farmers to go in. And I think it's also, I guess, important to note that you have to have some level of experience to implement, to work with NRCS. They're not going to put together, they're not going to build a farm business for you, but if you have a plan in place and you're operating, then they can certainly help you with some of the conservation. Okay,
here's a comment. It says that this person just thought that you should emphasize that the practice must be completed to the specifications before farmers are paid.
Right, and that is correct. And so, again, it's really important to know what you're agreeing to do to make sure that you're okay with that, because if you don't do it to the specifications, then you will not get your payment. So you need to be very careful of that.
Okay, and here's another comment about hosting tours, that they provide a very good peer-to-peer learning experience for practitioners. And just, I guess the person wanted to know if you agreed with that.
Yes, absolutely. In this last year, I was in 12 different states doing trainings, and the farm tours were by far one of the most enjoyable and educational components of those workshops. And I think there's a lot of value. Everyone has their stereotypes, and I think it's great for folks to get out onto an organic farm and actually see what productive and sustainable systems they could be. So if you're able to host tours and provide that, I would definitely encourage folks to do that.
Okay. How can we encourage our state to develop small farm payment options?
Good question. And again, I think this goes back to being on the state technical committees, so really making sure that organic farmers in your state have a voice. I would encourage you to provide that feedback at that venue. Or you can also, I mentioned every state has an organic contact, and so those individuals are on that list, and they know that they often get calls from organic producers. So don't be shy about calling them and letting them know that the program is or is not working for you, and giving them feedback, because that's the only way that the program can improve.
Yeah, so that sounds like it might be advice for the next person here who wanted to know what you should do if you don't have responsive local NRCS offices.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sorry to say that I do hear that feedback. And I think that the agency has taken significant steps to improve that, but there are still people who are not as open to the idea of organic. And if you're struggling with your local office, again, just call your state organic contact. And that link is on our website, and it's on the National EQIP Organic Program website.
Okay. Now we're getting some questions about support for specific practices. For example, one listener wanted to know whether there was any support for aquaponics, and another person wanted to know whether there was any support for solar energy programs.
Well, energy, it has recently been identified as a resource concern for NRCS, so there's a number of, there is actually an energy initiative separate from the organic initiative. You'd be surprised. There's also some states have taken on some of their own projects and programs, or your local soil and water conservation districts might have support for special projects. So again, that's, I can't speak to the specifics there, but I definitely encourage people to ask.
Okay, we've got two questions here about whether or not there are special considerations for farmers who lease rather than own their land, and how small of a leased acreage you can have to be considered.
Good question. So I know that if you're signing a contract for the EQIP program, you need to show, and those contracts can be a number of years, and so depending on how long of a contract you sign, you're going to need to be able to demonstrate that you have control over the property for that period. And for those details, again, you'll need to work with your local office, but you can access the program if you're leasing property. That shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, yeah, that's great. We just got another question about that too, whether a farmer is on a 2 or 3 year lease, whether they'd be available for funding. Let's see. Here's a question about whether or not the NRCS will buy bees.
That's a great question. From my knowledge, I've not seen a state that buys bees, but there's a practice called upland wildlife habitat, I believe, and through that practice there's a number of kind of alternative neat things that can be supported. And again, it varies by state, but I've seen some states that will provide financial assistance with mason bee boxes and raptor perches and bat boxes. So all sorts of neat things are available, and again, it varies, but it's certainly worth asking about. And I know while they might not buy bees, they will certainly assist you with putting in a habitat for bees. So equally beneficial.
Okay. Let's see. Can you discuss the lack of TSAs to assist with writing the conservation plan transitioning to organic as required to participate in the EQIP organic program, and why the payments to these professionals are so low that they would rather not work with small organic farms? They are paid by the acre, and it's not worth it for small diversified farms.
Okay, good, complicated question. So I mentioned at the beginning that there's support specifically for transitioning producers, and the practice is called a conservation activity plan supporting transition to organic, and those are written by technical service providers, and there aren't very many technical service providers out there. You are not required as a producer to get that plan, so you don't have to sign up for it, so you shouldn't be limited or excluded from the program for that reason. The payments have recently been improved, and I actually feel are very reasonable for technical service providers. So if you're interested in becoming a technical service provider, I would either contact your state organic contact, or each state has a technical service provider coordinator who you could contact. And again, those payments have recently changed, so I do believe it's much more reasonable now.
Okay, here's just a comment about how one listener's agent seems not to know about the EQIP initiative. We just signed up for another one, and that was not what we wanted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an issue. And, you know, I will admit that before taking this position as an organic farmer, I thought, well, NRCS isn't for me. They're not familiar with organic farms or smaller farms. And I've learned a lot since working here, and one of the things I've realized is how incredibly overwhelmed NRCS planners can be, because there are just so many programs beyond the organic initiative that they're managing. So again, be patient. If you feel like they really don't know or are not informed, contact the state organic contact, and if you're just really not having luck, feel free to contact me, and I can try to put you in touch with the appropriate person.
Okay, here's a follow-up question on signing up for both the organic and regular EQIP. Is there any disadvantage to signing up for both programs at the same time?
That's a good question. I would say the main disadvantage would probably be the paperwork, which is a big hurdle for folks just signing up for one program. So I don't know if I would encourage it, but that would be a great question to talk to your local planner about, to assess which program might be a better fit for you, depending on how big of a contract you're going to have, or how competitive your contract looks. So, yeah.
Okay, this is a long question, so we may need to break it up a bit. But what type of commitments do the contracts bind a participant to regarding selling the land within a time frame, and with regard to use after the sale, to the future obligation to any program or the USDA or other government agency, and 3, the ability to employ standards or practices of other natural type programs like biodynamics, the Real Food Campaign, permaculture, and other systems that may have different standards. So I can break that up if you need me to.
Yeah, these are great questions to be asking, and unfortunately I'm not comfortable answering the questions regarding the contracts, but I absolutely think those should be asked. The question about whether or not you can employ standards of practices like biodynamic, there is probably no reason that you couldn't do that. You just want to make sure when you're signing up for a practice like nutrient management that's going to rely largely on extension information, that that's not conflicting with the practices that you want to do on your farm. So again, it really boils down to how the practices will be implemented, and there's no rule that says biodynamic farms can't sign up. They're absolutely as eligible as anyone else would be, but you just want to make sure that the details don't conflict with what you're doing. So.
Okay, we've got several questions coming in about irrigation.
Yeah, I see those, and I guess, you know, there's policy associated with irrigation, and so it's really very farm specific. They have to review your irrigation history on the specific piece of land that you want to have under EQIP Organic Initiative, and then they can work with you to determine whether or not it's eligible. So I can't really answer those other questions that have come up more than that.
Okay. Let's see. Here's a question about from someone who's starting a farm on land that hasn't been farmed, so they're not transitioning, but they would like to farm organically. So can they access funds to establish organic practices and for basic infrastructure such as fencing, compost facility, high tunnel, organic certification? We'd also like to create a buffer because the surrounding farms are conventional. Would these practices fit well with the program?
They could be a great fit, and that sounds like, you know, there could be a lot of potential to work together there. So it would definitely be worth getting in touch with their local folks to figure out what they could do.
Okay, yeah. Returning to irrigation, since we've gotten, this is sort of an issue that keeps coming up. Are there any opportunities for developing irrigation where there's no prior irrigation history?
As far as I know, that's much more difficult because with NRCS, they want to be increasing the efficiency of what's going on the farm. So if you haven't been using any water at all and you want to start using more water, that'd be kind of the opposite. So I think you need to demonstrate that you're improving the efficiency that's of what's being irrigated, but I don't know the specific guidelines for that.
Okay. Let's see. Here's a question about whether there's a program for tree replacement. The ones that we have are in poor condition and not very productively green.
I'm sorry. It's for tree replacement?
Yeah, for tree replacement.
Huh. Well, if you want to install trees on your farm for wildlife habitat or for windbreaks, I think there are absolutely opportunities and practices that might fit very well to do plantings.
Okay. Does the 5K limit on sales for the exemption from certification apply to sales for all produce, for example, animal as well as vegetable?
Right, and that's the National Organic Program rules. You can definitely contact your local certifier if you have specific questions there, but it's gross organic sales. So, yeah.
Let's see. If you use the assistance of a TSP for writing a conservation plan, will the fee go against the $20K that's allowed per year for the contract?
Yeah, the TSP and the plan that they would write would be a portion of your larger contract, and so it would be included in the $20,000 limit. And I just saw another question pop up above that was asking about the reimbursement for the costs of organic certification. And I didn't mention that, and I wanted to briefly that there is an organic certification cost share program. It's not administered through NRCS. It's administered through the USDA National Organic Program, and usually you have to contact your state Department of Agriculture. They usually house the program in each state. So they can cost share on up to 75% or $750 of the cost of your organic certification, and I believe that's on an annual basis. So it's really another neat program that's available for organic producers.
Yeah, we have some information on that program too on the eOrganic website at extension.org/organic _production. I'll put that link back in because we do have some information on the organic certification cost share program, or you can Google that as well and find more information about that. Here's a question about whether bird houses or bat houses might be funded.
Yeah, I know many states do have those available as practices, and again, practice availability varies by state, so there's a good chance that is available under the Organic Initiative.